Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of RotoBaller Radio's Fantasy Football Preview Series. I'm your host, Anthony Aniano, here with you today as we take a look at the ADP value of 5 wide receivers as you prepare for your fantasy football draft. Guys, don't forget, head over to rotoballer.com and check out all the great content there. Whether it's football, baseball, basketball, MMA, esports, NASCAR, PGA, or sports betting, rotoballer.com, the place to be. Whether you play season-long or DFS or both, okay, head over to rotoballer.com and check out all the great content. Use the promotional code ACES and save yourself quite a bit of money on any of our premium packages, whether it's baseball for the stretch run or fantasy football all year long as you prepare for those fantasy football drafts. All right, everybody. So if you've been following on RotoBaller Radio's podcast channels or the RotoBaller Radio YouTube channel, I've done the QB ADP analysis, the running back ADP analysis. Now it's time to take a look at some wide receivers and let you be the judge on if you want to use that draft capital on these players. So we start with Adam Thielen of the Minnesota Vikings. Currently going as wide receiver 19, and that's a consensus. ESPN, Yahoo, FFPC, whatever the format is, that's an average of where he is going. He's going as wide receiver 19, so that's a wide receiver 2, PPR format in a 12-team league. Overall pick, he's going on average as pick 50. So you're talking about round 4, round 5 for your second wide receiver in Adam Thielen. Now, Adam Thielen last year, 74 receptions on 108 targets, playing with Kirk Cousins, and kind of sliding into the second wide receiver role. Justin Jefferson kind of became the alpha there, the big play guy. All right, be mindful of this now. Adam Thielen, okay, in 2017 and 2018, he had over 1,000 yards. He had over 1,200 yards and over 140 targets. 2019, he didn't come close to that. 2020, he did not come close to those numbers as well. Under 1,000 yards, 925. Only 74 receptions and 108 targets, much less than those 140 plus he had in his best 2 seasons of 2017 and 2018. He averaged 12.5 yards per catch. Yet, okay, in 2020, Adam Thielen finished 10th in fantasy points of all wide receivers with 254 points. And he averaged just under 17 points per game, 16.9. This was all helped by an astronomical 14 touchdowns in 2020. Okay? A number, and this is going to be the basis of this conversation, a number that I just don't see being sustainable again in 2021. Okay? His career high in touchdowns before last season was 9. Okay, he's never had double-digit touchdowns before this season, and I don't know now, year 2, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook still there. Can Kirk Cousins throw 35 touchdown passes again? These are all questions that are uncertain at the very least. Now, on average, okay, Adam Thielen, if you remove those touchdowns, because touchdowns are not linear. All right, if he had 14 last season, he's not going to have 14 again this season. So understand that, okay? His average was 5 receptions for 62 yards. He averaged 16.9 per game last year. Without those touchdowns, he averaged 11 fantasy points per game. Okay, that's what he was. So the fall for Adam Thielen, if those touchdowns regress, the fall becomes pretty significant in 2021. Relying on somebody to get you 14 touchdowns is a faulty way to look at your fantasy football roster. So be mindful of that. 7.8 targets per game for Justin Jefferson last year. I expect that to go up. Adam Thielen, 7.2. I do expect those targets to remain consistent, okay? But without the yardage, with Justin Jefferson being the alpha male there in Minnesota now, okay, and with a possible touchdown regression, Adam Thielen is a risky wide receiver to pick at wide receiver 19 in the 4th round. Now take a look at DJ Moore of Carolina. Now, Adam Thielen's 31 years old. DJ Moore, 24 years old, going as wide receiver 23. Overall pick 56. Going about 6 picks after Adam Thielen. 4 wide receivers after Adam Thielen. He's a wide receiver 2 as well, round 5. Okay, 10 more targets than Adam Thielen last year, 118. Now, this was with Teddy Bridgewater under center. Okay, 7.9 targets per game. Now, my concern with DJ Moore are the targets per game. He was second in that team in targets last season. He was behind Robbie Anderson, who had 8.5 targets per game. Okay, DJ Moore had 7.9. And this was without Christian McCaffrey for most of the season in the backfield. Now, what has Carolina done? They've gotten healthier with Christian McCaffrey. And who did they bring in? They bring in Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold, who has played with Robbie Anderson with the Jets. Do we see those target shares flip and DJ Moore become the primary target monster for Sam Darnold? Or does it remain Robbie Anderson? That is a legitimate question for somebody you are potentially drafting as your second wide receiver. Okay, 118 targets on the season, 66 receptions. Now, the good stuff about DJ Moore are those yards per catch. 18.1 yards per catch. Sign me up for that. Oh, just under 1,200 yards. 1,193 to be exact. 4 touchdowns total on the year. He finished last year 25th in fantasy points at the wide receiver position at 211.5 in 15 games. An average of 14.1 points per game. Now, again, significantly less touchdowns than Adam Thielen. And if you look at what DJ Moore did in that 14.1 points per game, okay, his game average was 4.4 receptions and 79.5 yards. Quick rounding, it's about 18 more yards, receiving yards per game than Adam Thielen on about the same number of receptions. Okay, so if without his touchdowns, he still averaged 12.3 fantasy points per game compared to the 14.1 he averaged when you include the touchdowns into his game script. So it consists more, potentially a more consistent play. The question with DJ Moore becomes, as you're drafting him as wide receiver 23 overall in round 5, is he really the number one guy there with Sam Darnold and there with Christian McCaffrey back and with Robbie Anderson having more targets last year and being reunited with Sam Darnold? Okay. Third wide receiver on the list right now. Going at wide receiver. Now we're going to drop down a bit. Wide receiver 52, Corey Davis, former Tennessee Titan, now the big free agent acquisition of the New York Jets. Going at wide receiver 52, overall pick 145. So a significant drop now. We're going about 6-7 rounds later in Corey Davis. He's being drafted as a wide receiver 4. All right. Last season with Tennessee, 65 receptions on 92 targets. Okay, 984 yards, 15.1 yards per reception, 5 touchdowns on the season. Finished 30th in fantasy points at wide receiver, 191.4 fantasy points last year. Okay, in 14 games, 13.7 points per game. Right there with DJ Moore. DJ Moore finished with 14.1. Corey Davis at 13.7. Now, eliminating the 5 touchdowns and just looking at receptions and yardage, Corey Davis averaged 11.6 fantasy points per game. Again, right there with DJ Moore's 12.3. And right there with Adam Thielen's 11 points per game. Again, going back to the potential touchdown regression of Adam Thielen from 2020 to 2021. Now, the question with Corey Davis is, do we trust Zach Wilson as much as we trusted Ryan Tannehill when he was Corey Davis's quarterback last season for Tennessee? So looking at some targets per game, A.J. Brown last year was 7.6 targets per game. Jamison Crowder, who was the Jets' number 1 guy in the slot last year, but that's not necessarily going to remain the same this year, 7.4. Corey Davis, last season with Tennessee, 6.6. I expect Corey Davis's targets to increase. I expect him to be in that 7 range, 7 to 7.2 targets per game. He was brought in to be the number 1 wide receiver for the rookie Zach Wilson. Okay, on average last season, 4.6 receptions 170 yards per game. 12, just about 11.6, like I said, points per game. A realistic number for Corey Davis, even with Zach Wilson, and at a draft value I love, wide receiver 4, round 12, wide receiver 52, overall pick 145. Now, next up, Russell Gage. And everybody, if you go on Twitter, the cesspool that it is, okay, Russell Gage, some people like him and some people are just crapping all over Russell Gage. What they're not, in my opinion, accounting for is what I think is a pretty safe floor that Russell Gage established for himself last year. Now, he's going as wide receiver 57, okay, overall pick 158. It's a 13th round pick on average, 4th or 5th wide receiver. Now, just listen to this. Last season, with Calvin Ridley, with an injured Julio Jones, okay, in Atlanta, Russell Gage had 109 targets. Adam Thielen, remember what I said at the start of this episode here, had 108. Russell Gage had 72 receptions. Adam Thielen had 74. Okay? The volume was there comparable to Adam Thielen, who right now is being drafted as wide receiver 19. Now, people are down on Russell Gage because I know Julio Jones is out, but Kyle Pitts is now there. What kind of volume monster will Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts? Will they pull away from Russell Gage? And that's a fair question. Russell Gage last year, 6.8 targets a game. Julio Jones, 7.6. Calvin Ridley, 9.5. Now, Calvin Ridley's target share, 10 targets a game. It's not going to go up to 12 targets a game. You just don't see numbers like that. So it's going to stay at that 9 or 10 range. So now the question becomes the 7.6 that Julio Jones was averaging per game. Where are they going? Are they all going to Kyle Pitts? Do we see a bump in Russell Gage's targets while Kyle Pitts comes in and gets some of Julio Jones's targets? It's going to be interesting. But I am willing to find out at wide receiver 57 with Russell Gage in round 13. I'm absolutely willing to find out in drafting Russell Gage as my wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 4. 786 yards last year, 10.9 yards per catch, 4 touchdowns. He finished 37th last year in total fantasy points at wide receiver with 181.1 in playing all 16 games, and finished the season with 11.3 points per game. Okay, that's a wide receiver 4. Maybe doesn't have the upside. Maybe he settles in as a wide receiver 4 and tops out as a wide receiver 3. 37th last year, top 36 your wide receiver 3, so just outside of that. So maybe there's not the upside there. But in round 13, that's a safe play, Russell Gage with the Atlanta Falcons. And finally, my ultimate upside play is Christian Kirk of the Arizona Cardinals. Wide receiver 73. He's a freebie going as wide receiver, as a wide receiver 6. Overall, 225. It's after round 18. He's legitimately not being drafted in 16 round drafts with 12 teams. Okay? Now, target share was low. DeAndre Hopkins was a target monster for Arizona, 10 targets per game. Okay, now, they brought in A.J. Green. A.J. Green, 6.5 targets per game for Cincinnati last season. He is being brought in along with Christian Kirk. Larry Fitzgerald was only 5.5 targets per game. Christian Kirk was 5.6. Larry Fitzgerald's targets go somewhere. Do they all go to A.J. Green? Do they get split between Kirk and A.J. Green? And for me, biggest issue, does A.J. Green come anywhere close to playing 16 games? Christian Kirk is still the second best wide receiver and probably the second best target option for Kyle Murray. A.J. Green has that big playability. There's no denying that. He's been the alpha in that Cincinnati offense, but he's also been injury prone. Okay, Christian Kirk, on average, 3.4 receptions, 44 yards per game. 6 touchdowns, though, last season. More than any other wide receiver on my list other than Adam Thielen. 12.9 yards per reception. More than the 12.5 yards per reception that Adam Thielen had last season. Now, last season he finished as 51st in total points per game in total points for wide receivers with 146.4 points. He did that in 14 games. He averaged 10.5 fantasy points per game. So another 10-point per game player who's going as a 6th wide receiver in your fantasy team. So if you've done something like you've expanded your fantasy rosters because of COVID and situations where teams may not be able to play on certain weeks, then Christian Kirk sitting there super late has the ability to be a nice upside play. There's no loss in Christian Kirk. If Christian Kirk busts, you drop and you move on. But 10.5 points per game. Larry Fitzgerald's not there. AJ Green is injury prone. Christian Kirk has the ability for upside. So now you have to decide. Do you want Adam Thielen as your wide receiver 2 in round 4? Do you want DJ Moore as your wide receiver 2 in round 4 or round 5? Okay, and then your 4th and 5th wide receivers, Russell Gage, round 13, Corey Davis, round 12, or do you want the freebie in Christian Kirk as your 4th or 5th wide receiver? All right, everybody, give me a follow on Twitter at Aniano Fantasy. Like I said at the start, head over to RotoBaller.com and check out all the great content there as well. And be sure right here on RotoBaller's YouTube channel to check out the running back and quarterback ADP values as well. Be smart, be safe. We'll see you next time. Have a good one, folks.